Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today, today's service management call. Today we have Michel Avenel. He's with the ITAM product management team. And Michel's going to give us an update on CA's IT Asset Manager today. Just a couple housekeeping notes. You can ask questions in the Q&A, and you can also hit #6 on your phone to unmute your line and ask a question. And then *6 will mute your line again. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Michel.
Thanks, Chris. Good afternoon, or good morning, I should say, and good afternoon to everyone. Appreciate your being with us today. I'm going to share some updates with you about ITAM, IT Asset Manager, specifically a new release of the SAM component of the solution, the 4.0 release, and then we'll talk about a new set of capabilities or offering that we're bringing to the marketplace called the Optimization and Simulation module. All right, so our standard legal disclaimer, and I think we're all probably familiar with this from other presentations, but obviously anything I'm sharing today is informational only as of today's date. So with that said, I'm sure there was more I was supposed to say on that slide, but we'll go ahead and move on. SAM 4.0 is a new release of the SAM component. SAM, of course, is part of ITAM, but 4.0 is being made available, or will be made available early this month. It'll be downloadable from the CA support site very soon. And if you are already an entitled ITAM customer, then you would be there would be no additional licensing required to avail yourself of SAM 4.0. And in terms of scope, as you'll see in just a moment, the primary change is a new user interface. We're introducing a dashboard and a number of other features that I'll go over with you now. All right, so in keeping with our themes within the broader service management solution, the SAM 4.0 release is focused on, from a targeted value perspective, on improving satisfaction, user satisfaction, and driving increased productivity. So the big new feature, and you can see in the center of the screen there, the thing that probably jumps out at you most after a change in the color palette is a much larger active workspace. You can see we've kind of created more space, a bigger pane of glass, if you will, with which to interact in the solution and in the data. We've also improved the navigation of the solution with a flatter ribbon, new menu icons that are more modern, and one of the key aspects is that you're able to get to a result or get to the area of the application that you want to work in with far fewer clicks with the new navigation. As far as the workflows are concerned, for new users, the idea behind this is it makes a new user feel like an expert faster, just in terms of their ability to navigate within the solution. And then, of course, for experienced users that have already been plugged into the tool for some time, enables them to drill deeper into some of the more complex tasks much faster. Quick access to data tables, another feature. So this is in the navigation menu, which I'll show in more detail in just a moment. It displays frequently used data grids or tables like contracts and licenses, while making others available lower down or as part of a favorites menu. So it's displaying frequently used tables and information higher up on the screen to make it easier to get to. We have a new search feature, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into the slides, but it helps you to locate menu items more quickly and also save them as part of your favorites, which I'll touch on. Favorites is much like a browser bookmark. The idea is that you can display data in the tool, and it'll remember not just that particular table, but all of the specific elements, such as tables, filter results, the layout of the table, in other words, what columns I'm displaying, and even the order in which those columns are displayed. And then they become available in the favorites menu with just a single click. And then, of course, the other big feature that we'll discuss here is a dashboard, and I'll navigate to that in just a moment. So this is kind of a bigger view of the new interface. So you can see it's a softer color palette with lighter colors and updated branding, again, new and improved menu icons. And for those of you that are new to the solution, SAM is 100% web-based, and so there's no, it's all accessed through your local browser. You see the traditional A model that we have all become familiar with, but there is also a new dashboard that I'll talk about in just a moment. So looking at the navigation, you can see, again, the most common tables and data grids are displayed at the top and can be accessible through a single click. And again, I talked a little bit about favorites, but the idea here is I have entered, I'm looking at the products table. I'm looking for a specific product, in this case, Microsoft Office 2013. And I can change the table layout and the order of the columns that I'm displaying. I can save that into my favorites bar, which is up in the upper left there. I called it Microsoft. I gave it a name called Microsoft Office 2013, and now that becomes essentially a bookmark or a favorite that I can navigate back to because it's something I use frequently. And then, of course, there's the new dashboard. And again, for those of you that are familiar with SAM, we've become accustomed to the A model. Out of the box, the dashboard is the new landing page or start page. Of course, you can configure it to revert back to the A model if you'd like as the landing page. But the dashboard provides greater visibility into the information that's most important to you based on the job that you perform and KPIs. So it was intended to address a number of common questions we get, SAM-related questions. For example, where am I with respect to my compliance? What is my compliance position now, or as I'm embarking on that journey to work toward compliance, what is my position and how quickly can I get there? Or depending upon my role, what do I need to focus on today based on my job function? The information is available in the dashboard to all users, regardless of their role, but of course, based on the security roles that are configurable, only the data to which that profile or that role has been given access will be displayed, right? So it can essentially be customized and creates a level of personalization. Here's kind of a closer look at the dashboard. And it's broken down in quadrants. So if I look at the upper left-hand quadrant, I'm focusing on device and device information. Upper right-hand side is information and KPIs related to contract and license, my entitlement data. Lower right-hand quarter is focused on software recognition or product recognition, information about my product recognition position. And then lower left provides insights into the metric engine warnings based on the supported metric engines. So what work would be needed to clear those warnings. And I'll talk a little bit more about metric engines and metric engine hints and warnings in a few minutes. So that's the new dashboard. A number of other product enhancements. I touched a little bit on menu search, but the idea here is obviously it's a very data-centric tool. You're accessing lots of data in different tables. And so the menu search is essentially a search field that allows you to type in a keyword based on what you're looking for, and it will provide to you or quickly help you navigate to that menu, including the data or the content in your favorites. And for those of you that are power users that aren't big fans of the mouse, menu search can be accessed directly from the keyboard. As is typically the case in point releases for SAM, we've made incremental enhancements to our metric engines. In this case, in the 4.0 release, updates to the generic hardware metric engine, where we've added support for license metrics around virtualization, additional support, and also support or greater support for tier-based metrics. And then performance is a continual theme. Again, given that it's such a highly data-centric tool, we're dealing with, in many cases, millions and millions of records or objects. In the 3.6.7 release, we made improvements to the product recognition jobs or capabilities and saw dramatic improvements in running the recognition job. It went from, in some cases, from days down to hours. And this release was focused more about the import process, about importing raw data through our connector fabric from different data sources. One of the things that has delivered significant improvements is the ability to import directly from other databases or tables rather than from a flat file. And so that's significantly improved the rate or the speed at which data can be pulled into the system. We also added a new import preprocessor. This was a highly requested capability so that effective demand, which is the left side of the A model to tell us how much software we're using in our environment, rather than running the cron job or the job in its entirety and then waiting sometimes quite some time for the result, we can now refresh based on individual metric engines. So that, of course, that gives us a faster result if our focus is in a specific area. And then we made a few improvements as well to accessibility within the solution. So that's kind of a quick snapshot of CA-SAM 4.0. It's actually 4.01. As I said earlier, it is expected to be available early this month and will be posted on the CA support site for download when it's ready. I think I'll go ahead and move to the next announcement, which is about the OSM, or the Optimization and Simulation module, before we break for questions, just for continuity's sake. So, so the next topic is a new offering for CA, and it's called the Optimization and Simulation module. It is available immediately. It's an add-on module to the core SAM component. So it's so SAM, CA-SAM, the core module is a prerequisite. It's priced by server. The metric is server, so it's focused on data center licensing. And as far as the scope is concerned, it's really focused on optimization of cost, support planning, and improve procurement or buying decisions. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So there's a lot that happens under the cover, so to speak, with the simulation module, and I know this is something of an eye chart, but I'll walk you through it. So in terms of business value, again, it's really focused on the savings elements or the financial elements of SAM that a SAM program can bring to a customer. Supporting more strategic buying decisions, so reducing or if not eliminating the need to purchase additional licenses by leveraging your existing purchases or investments, so getting more value out of the investments you've made, and then supporting support planning. So if you look on the left-hand side in terms of the core features, it's the goal of the capability is to deliver or I should say a primary goal is to deliver the least cost option to license your environment based on the software that you're running in your environment. So it will simulate the impact of different licensing scenarios, whether it's just a physical server or virtualized environment or cluster, based on the different ways or options that you have to license a given software product. It can also make recommendations or at least provide insight into changes in your operational environment and the way that you're hosting or the way that your environment is configured, the hardware infrastructure, that could reduce license demand. It also provides a comparison of different options and understanding the financial impact if you were to make a change. I indicated earlier that it supports different types of planning and budgeting, so it's very much supports the true-up process and making better decisions when it comes time to either to make a purchase to true-up or to determine that perhaps we can reduce our maintenance cost, and then when contract renewals come due. And then it will also support kind of a deeper analysis around your compliance position in an audit scenario. And so we'll touch on all of these as we dig in. Now, again, this is something of a data-centric solution, so we're going to kind of dig into a little bit of detail on this call, hopefully not so much to overwhelm you. But before we jump into the capabilities themselves, I just want to talk a little bit about what optimization is, from our perspective, and really how it's something of a game changer. What we've seen is that customers typically will search or seek out a compliance solution or tool based on their need to solve a problem, and most often it's related to an audit. And so they're focused on what the traditional entry point is trying to get their arms around compliance. The optimization module is kind of driving toward higher levels of maturity. But on the compliance side, we really tend to be focused on costs, managing risk, and mitigating or avoiding unnecessary cost. And these could be in the case of an audit where we have unplanned costs because we've got a true up, or there could be fines associated or something like that. What the optimization module does is it really kind of drives it's hard to show an ROI for cost avoidance. You can certainly say I saved X, Y, Z, but you really didn't save, you really avoided a spend, most often is the case. And so what optimization does is it drives really the deeper value proposition of a SAM program as it's implemented. And so the idea is that as we mature, as we're on our journey to implement a SAM program, we're moving from more of a reactive management of our asset estate or our software licenses to a more strategic approach where we're actively dealing with things like cost reductions as opposed to cost avoidance, and better spending decisions and improved planning. So from our perspective, it's the key value proposition for any SAM program, and it is what we ultimately want to drive to from a maturity perspective. All right, so I'm going to use a very simple scenario to drive the discussion around the capabilities of the optimization module. And as I said earlier, the primary goal of the OSM is to provide you with the least cost option to license your environment. And again, it's focused on the data center or server-based licensing, and it is a particular value when there is more than one way to license software. So looking at the A model here, if you're familiar with the solution, and even if you're not, obviously we're providing data in the form of discovered software and other types of usage information on the left-hand side of the A model. And then on the right side, we're providing information about the purchases we've made and the contracts we've entered into, our entitlements, if you will. And so our goal on each side is to get to effective demand, which is what software am I using, and effective license, meaning what is my aggregate license position that I can use to address demand. An example of where there may be a different way to license software or a particular product differently is if we were to look at Oracle database. There are two common licensing approaches. One would be your processor, which is the most common, and then the other one would be named user plus. So when you have a choice to license a software product differently, in SAM you can override the default licensing based on either information that can be detected, which would be automatic, or based on information that can't be detected, where you have to provide additional information to the tool to make that override. So we call those metric engine hints. Metric engine hints is information that can tell the solution to behave differently based on the nature of the licensing models that you have at your disposal. So it's a way, again, to provide an override over different licensing methods for a given product. So if I just show you a quick example of a metric engine hint here, on the left-hand side, we just see the base hints for the SQL Server metric engine. So that's the metric engine that understands all the different ways in which to license SQL Server and the underlying algorithms, in other words, the calculation that needs to be done in order to get to the result. And so we can't necessarily discover what licensing method to use. That would have to be a choice made by the customer. And oftentimes there's information that we discover that can help drive that decision, but in many cases there's data that would be additional data that would be needed, and so we have to tell sometimes the solution how to license it, what method to use. And the challenge that we have is we need information, we need analysis to make that decision. So using an example of Windows Server, and I know that this is something of an eye chart, this is what we call a topology graph in SAM. And at the top, what we're seeing is a regular ESX or VMware cluster environment. And we see 10 virtual machines, which are at the top here, on one clustered device with 2 physical hosts. So, and again, I know it's hard to see because it's such an eye chart, but I'll ask you to take my word for it. So the blue devices or the blue boxes represent the physical host, and the yellow devices represent the virtualized systems running on that cluster. Of course, we know that the cluster itself is not actually a physical device. We call it a helper device, just to be able to accurately represent the topology. So what you may not be able to see, just because the slide is so small, is that there are a number of Windows Server installations running in the virtual layer here. So by default, we would calculate those server licenses or the requirement or the demand for those separately. And then we would look at the overall effective license demand based on that configuration. So we see that the demand, and you can see that, so this represents the physical the installations of software, these little light yellow boxes, and these blue boxes below the physical represent the demand. And we see an effective demand for Windows Server 2008 R2 Enterprise and R2 Standard. If we look at the virtual machines, and I know it's hard to see again, but we see 2 installations of Windows Standard, Windows Server Standard, and 8 of the Enterprise Edition. So Windows 2008, of course, allowed us to license 4 virtual machines with a single enterprise license. So in this case, we would have 8 devices, meaning we need 2 enterprise licenses for the Enterprise Editions that are running, and then we would have 2 standard, 2003 standard servers, so we would need 2 additional on each of the 2 physical servers. I know I'm getting into some detail here, but this is a required foundation in order to really demonstrate the power of the OSM. So we could add a metric engine hint, which is what you see represented below. And these gearboxes are an indication that we've actually applied a hint to this topology to tell it that we want to use something different than the standard licensing. We want to exercise a different licensing option based on what the vendor provides to us, in this case, Microsoft. So, so we've told the metric engine to override the standard licensing and apply data center licensing. Now, as you can see, we have 4 CPUs running on each physical device. And so we're looking for 4 CPU licenses on each server. This would be a change in the demand calculation. If you know a little bit about Windows Server licensing, we would quickly recognize that it really doesn't make commercial sense to apply the data center licenses to an environment such as this. And that's because data center licensing costs roughly 8 times what a standard license costs. So you could say that I need at least 8 times the number of virtual instances on my cluster for the number of physical, as a ratio against the number of physical CPUs that I'm running in that cluster. So if I had, just to extrapolate a little, if I had a very powerful processor infrastructure, but not a lot of virtual machines, it might make sense to switch to the data center licensing. But if I have a large number of CPUs and not that many VMs, it may not make sense to use that option to apply that metric engine hint and use the data center licensing. Again, in this example, I have 8 CPUs across the physical layer and only 10 virtual machines. And so this isn't a ratio that would necessarily justify that application of the data center license. So with all that said, I'm just kind of sharing an example here of a typical configuration we might see in our environment. What the required comparison that needs to be done is I need to look at the different products and how they're licensed and of course what the licensing cost is associated with those. So one of the important elements that I need to include as part of my analysis is pricing information. So one of the things that the OSM includes is something we call the pricing assistant. And what it does is it scours all of the available information. This is one of the key capabilities of the OSM, is it scours all of the information that would be available in the database. And that would include supplier information that's part of the master catalog, licenses and license history, so your purchase history, even your downgrade paths and other information to understand what the average price is that I'm paying for each of the given products. And that would support our financial analysis to make a decision on the least cost option. All right, so with that said, as kind of a foundation, the first step in the optimization journey is what we call demand optimization. And what demand optimization does is it looks at all of the available options that I have, licensing options for a given product, and the metric engines, which understand how it's licensed and how to perform that calculations, will churn and calculate each option to find the best one based on the demand that I have in my environment, based on what software I'm running in the environment. So in this case, I'm looking at the Windows Server environment, and I see that I have, and again, this is a very small example based on the topology that we looked at, I see a potential cost savings of about $50,000. Now, optimization depends heavily on completeness and accuracy of the underlying data to support that analysis. And so one of the things that the optimization can do for you is to call out data points that may be missing that are required to support a complete and accurate optimization analysis. So I talked about reference prices earlier. So the solution will tell me that I may be missing some reference price information, and that might be because I didn't include the price that I paid during the import process for my licenses, or maybe that I don't have a complete product path hierarchy, or that there are topology warnings. And again, if you're familiar with the solution, we understand a little bit about metric engine warnings. I won't dig too deep into them, but these are examples of where I might need certain discovery data or usage data depending on the license metric. So for example, if I have a CPU-based metric, but I don't have CPU information for a group of systems within my environment, then it can't perform the required compliance analysis or optimization analysis. So the goal would be to clear those, to address those gaps, and that would give us a better view or a better outcome from an optimization perspective. That being said, we can still perform the analysis even with information that's missing. So what we see here on this screen, and I'll actually go back, this shows me the summary view. I click the show details of the analysis. It'll actually show me that virtualization topology that I shared with you a few slides back, and it will show me all of the different options that I can exercise in licensing that particular environment. Now you can see that I have a number of warnings. They're represented in red triangles, or pink in this case. So those simply indicate that this data, that the analysis was performed, but may not be as reliable as it could be because I've got some missing information. Or I may also be missing some pricing or financial information. And if I can address those, I'll get a better view of my analysis. So the idea here is what I'm seeing is I'm seeing the different ways, the different options or parameters around which I could license my software. And I'm seeing that if I use the data center edition, I'm going to be paying $17,000 and change to license that topology, that environment. Again, this is depending upon the availability of the data. But I can look at all my alternatives and I can see, well, geez, I could license that same environment using standard edition licenses and pay a grand total of $617, giving me a 94% savings. And so so what I can do then is, based on that analysis, I can apply the appropriate hints across to that topology or every other topology in my environment, and I can realize that savings. So the idea behind demand optimization is it's showing you essentially how to get in a greenfield environment. And if I didn't have a single license in my estate, if I hadn't purchased any software, and I had software being used, if I had to go out and buy it from scratch without having any licenses, so a new purchase, what would it cost me to license this environment? Now, unfortunately, that's not a very practical approach because most organizations already have licenses available to them. And so the next step in the process would be what we call license optimization. License optimization takes the very same approach, but what it does now is it factors in its additional, the next layer of analysis against my demand optimization to say, okay, I'm not buying greenfield licenses because I already own some, so how can I apply the existing investments that I've made to the demand in that environment? How can I optimize the use to get the best, the least cost option based on my purchases? And so license optimization is the second step, which, again, once I determine how to license based on the options available to me, I can apply those hints to the solution, and it'll obviously have an impact on my compliance position. Okay, and it will also free up additional licenses as my environments change. So license optimization builds on demand or demand optimization. The standard example that we use is that if I had a single server, a Windows server in my data center, so one single CPU, one core, if you will, I would only need one server license, standard server license, just a few $100s. It would be a very inexpensive purchase. But if I don't have a license, a standard license in my environment, it means I'd have to go out and buy one. As opposed to, it might be a better choice to use an existing data center license, which would be 7 times greater than my, because it's an 8-to-1 ratio. It would be 7 times more expensive to use it, but it would still be a lower cost option because I have that data center license available in my estate, in my repository. So while I would be overpaying by using a data center, I would be using a cannon to swat a fly, it still would be a lower cost option than utilizing or than going out and purchasing a net new license to meet that demand. So what that simple example illustrates is the fact that your optimization process is not static. Your optimization discipline is not static. That process needs to be as dynamic as the environment is in which I'm running software. And this is particularly important in virtualized environments where there's typically a high volume of change that occurs, where, for example, I could be dynamically allocating additional processing power to meet demand. Or I could be virtualizing a physical instance of software to save space, if you will, or to make room for another application. There are a variety of different scenarios that would drive the change. And so the idea here is I can continually update the analysis, my analysis based on the ever-changing environment and get a view, because again, the engine is recalculating all of the different options, or the optimization engine is recalculating all of my options and showing me what my least cost option would be. All right, so that is license optimization. So we went from demand optimization is if I had to buy licenses from scratch based on the way that I'm using software, how can I reduce my demand? License optimization builds on demand and factors in the purchases that I've already made. And then we have the third step, which is what we call license cost of installation. And this is where we saw the example, or where I mentioned that the OSM can actually provide insight into how I might change my operating environment to reduce demand and therefore consume fewer licenses. And I think the easiest way to do this is to simply show you in the tool. And I think I need to share my screen here, so let me do that very quickly. All right, so I'm looking at SAM here. If I go into license, to compliance and then optimization, I can view license cost of installation. So what I'm really looking at here with this particular component of the optimization module is I want to see what the average cost of a license is for each instance of the software product that I'm running. And so I would go up and I can change the parameters here just a second. So in this case, I'm focused on Oracle DB. I want to generate the report, and what this is going to do is, based on my discovery data, is show me, based on reference price and other data that's available, what am I paying for the average instance or installation of that software. So if I scroll to the right, I'm looking at the different virtualization topologies, and most of these environments are virtualized, and I can see what my average cost is, or what I'm paying, the deviation from my average. So in this case, for this particular instance, the way I'm licensing it, I'm paying $561 per license, or above the average cost of a license for that instance of the software. So what that enables me to do is to go over to my operations manager and have a meaningful discussion to say, hey, if we could, and there are obviously many constraints associated with this, but it supports the conversation that would enable me to potentially make changes to my environment that would reduce demand. So that's the idea. So that's the third step, if you will. That's higher levels of maturity where I can now begin to focus on how I'm running software in my environment to see if I'm using the most if I'm running it in the most optimal way from a licensing perspective. So summing it up, we typically see that customers are usually not out of compliance when they first roll out infrastructure, particularly server infrastructure. As part of the request process, the procurement team or the contracts team is going to go out and make sure, based on a given server configuration, virtualization, and all of the other elements, that we're adequately licensed. But again, we know that environments aren't static. They change very frequently, and so we have to be able to pivot, if you will, and we need meaningful information to help us ensure that we're adequately licensing or we're optimally licensing the environment based on the software we're running and the purchases that we've made. So that is just a brief look. I know it's a lot of information, a lot of detail, and I apologize for that, but that's a quick look at the optimization and simulation module. One note I wanted to make, just in terms of defining optimization, and I alluded to this earlier at the top of the call, but most of the capabilities we see in the marketplace around optimization really focus on things like secondary use rights or downgrade paths or parallel use rights. And those are things, for example, where we could meet additional demand with a single license. So, for example, secondary use rights would allow me to use one license to cover 2 installations of a given software product. From our perspective, we view that as table stakes. Those scenarios, those optimization scenarios, are actually already covered, already built into the core capabilities of the SAM solution. When we talk about optimization, we're talking about more meaningful analysis based on the way in which I can license different software products, layered on top of that what software purchases I've already made to make sure that I'm getting the best, the most strategic license position, right? And then, of course, looking further up the maturity model or the maturity curve to start to examine the way that I'm running software in the environment to make sure it's licensed in the most optimal way. So that's a quick look at the optimization module. And with that, I am going to pause. And Chris, I don't know if you're facilitating this or if I am, but open it up for for Q&A.
Yeah, so folks, if you want to ask a question, you can go ahead and hit #6 on your phone. You can also use the Q&A tab and ask your question in there. And Michael, you'll probably want to go up to the top of your screen and drop down and stop sharing so that it opens up this. There we go.
There we go.
So any questions for Michael? Again, #6 to unmute your phone. Or questions in the Q&A. I don't have any in the Q&A at this time. And it doesn't look like we're getting any questions on the phone. Last call.
Oh, come on, there has to be at least one question, guys.
There you go. All right, you got one Q&A.
I was going to say, you could say I did an excellent job presenting, but I know that that's not always the case, so all right.
There's one in the queue there now. Does it handle licensing constraints such as location?
It does, actually. It'll take into consideration how I apply my licensing based on any type of geographical restrictions within the contract. So yes, absolutely.
Any other questions for Michael, folks? Again, pound 6 on your phone if you want to ask a question on the phone.
In terms of, assuming I'm new to SAM, do we jump right into the optimization, or is it a progressive? I think you may have talked about this. Is it a progressive thing that we should look at that as one of the more longer-term mature aspects of software asset management, and I want to get control of the environment first through discovery and so forth, or is there a best practice for how I move forward if I'm starting from scratch versus a mature shop already?
That's a great question. Thanks for asking it, Alan. So the optimization module can provide value out of the box, but of course it's dependent upon the underlying data, both from discovery, the left side of the A model, as well as on the entitlement side. And so as we mature, right, and SAM is typically a very iterative process. So as we mature and provide more accurate and complete data, and that's the key, it's the results both from a compliance perspective as well as optimization are directly correlate to the completeness of your data and of course the accuracy of the incoming data. And again, examples that I used earlier would be if I have a CPU-based license metric, but I'm not getting CPU or core information, for example, for 20% of my estate, then my analysis is not going to be as complete or as accurate as it could be. So while it will definitely deliver value out of the gate, and it will even support an improved compliance position based on an audit scenario, the value comes in addressing the underlying data and then maturing to how I can better make use of the licenses I purchased, and then further from that, optimize the operating environment to consume fewer licenses or generate less demand. Other questions?
Yeah, I think you've got another one in the Q&A here from Rennie. I noticed you have Oracle and IBM as software in one of the slides. Is this product certified for audits from those vendors, or are the ILM and Oracle discovery tools still required?
So a couple of things, the way I respond to that. There are no SAM tools that are certified by a vendor for audit. It's kind of a misnomer. So what I'll say is that if you look at your IBM contract, for example, well, first of all, Oracle doesn't necessarily require an Oracle discovery tool. They just want to ensure that the data produced by that tool is reasonably accurate, and so that it can be done as part of the discussion that you have during the audit process. And then there are no substitutes for the ILMT. If you look at your IBM contract, we'll typically see that it's a required element, and the data, the underlying data that's needed has to come from the ILMT or an equivalent. SAM itself is discovery tool agnostic, so it's consuming data from external sources, and it relies on that. So there's really not a substitute per se in terms of the incoming data from an ILMT perspective.
Any other questions?
Just one other note. I'm sorry. We actually are preparing to publish a white paper on this notion of certified tools. I don't have a timetable, but it's something that we're working on, and I'm actually eager to share it because it's a frequent question that we get, and so it'll help to dispel some of the myths around certified tools, if you will, and what auditors will expect versus, or I should say what they would require, and whether or not a tool actually can be certified or not.
And I think we've got another question here from Scott. Since virtual systems are fluid, I think he means, how do you lock down your license after you have figured out your optimal usage?
So when you say lock down, because the change occurs so frequently in the environment, the idea is that you are likely to continually run those algorithms, the optimization analysis, based on the change, right? So, I mean, there's the old saying, if you've, in Texas, for example, where I live, they say, if you don't like the weather, wait a minute. The same is true in a virtualized environment. If you don't like the environment, wait a minute, it'll change. And so both from a compliance and an optimization perspective, what you're ever really looking at is a snapshot in time. So the idea of locking down your licenses, there's the financial aspect of cost distribution and assigning licenses, if you will, based on the owner or the purchase. But in terms of getting the optimal coverage based on the purchases you've made in the aggregate, that's continual analysis that happens over and over. It's a recurring thing. It's a very iterative process.
Any other questions for Michael, either in the Q&A or on the phone? Again, #6. I don't see any other questions, so I think with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up for today. Thank you very much, Michael and Alan, for taking the time with us, and we'll be posting the recording in the community. And if there's any questions you guys folks think of, feel free to ask them there, and I know Michael and or Alan will jump in and help answer them. So thank you. Thanks again, Michael.
Thanks, everyone, for your time.
Have a great day, everybody.